Welcome back on the AM show. Time now for us to delve into the economy-related matters. Bernice Lanza joins me. Good morning, Bernice.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. I hope you are too.
I am. We can't complain. I mean, it's what it is.
It's a brand new day. I started off the show talking about the fact that we're getting to the end of, in fact, we've got to the end of this month. A new month is starting this day, this second, this minute, this hour. This show will never come our way again. And someone slept yesterday thinking, oh, tomorrow, but tomorrow never came.
You're absolutely right.
We take it one day
You're absolutely
at a time.
right. In fact, just last night when I was pondering over what to do this morning, and there's just so many things happening on my mind, how my day's going to go, I just had a voice say, relax. You're not even promised tomorrow. Live the moment. So I was just telling someone, sometimes we just need to pause and live. Because before you realize, all the time is gone, all the moments are gone, and you're left with nothing because you didn't pause and live, right? Okay. So that's just some little motivation this morning. And it's for me as well, because see, sometimes things don't go the way you planned, but what can you do?
Life is happening.
Right.
I found out about something that I should have known in my coursework that is due, and it's just crazy. But we come here and do what we do best.
Yeah.
Like she said, it is what it is. But we're going to be delving into the financial matters. Before we do, though, just to cool your temperature, get a sip of water. And I'm proffering for you awake, purified drinking water. It's treated through a strict purification process to ensure that every bottle on the market refreshes you better. And they have the perfect sizes for everybody. So if you're thinking of the kids, 330 milliliters, small, nice pack, they can put it in their bags and take them to school. 500 milliliters, 750 milliliters, 1.5 liters for those who always want more, like Bernice and yours truly. But if you're thinking of something for your office or home, they have 19-liter jar bottles that are ideal for those purposes. So now all you have to do is stay awake with awake purified drinking water. And also remember, for me, something that is very heartwarming. For every bottle you buy, for every purchase you make, they make a donation to the National Cardiothoracic Center. That is indeed heartwarming. So just stay awake with awake purified drinking water. It's another quality product by Casapreco Company Limited. If you'd like to purchase in bulk, call 0262 351 251. This advert is FDA approved. Now, joining us for the conversation on the economy, there's been a lot of talk. But where do we go from here? Dr. Theo Echampong is economist and political risk analyst. He joins the conversation. We also have Dr. Saad Idrisu, an economist, Louisiana Economic Development, together with Dr. Richmond Etiahene, a banking consultant. And what will we do without the tax people? Gideon Ayo, tax partner, Deloitte, Ghana. Gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
I'd just like to hear from each one of you to be sure I have all of you on board.
Good morning.
Okay. I guess I just wanted to hear everyone's voice. I'll start with you, Dr. Theo Echampong, just briefly as we get into the conversation. There's been this merry-go-round back and forth with the mid-year budget review, and finally, it's about to be delivered for, today. I'll just start with your brief appreciation of where we find ourselves as a country. We were told that in recent times, debt had gone up by some 20%, and what your expectations, briefly, would be today before we get into the thrust of the conversation. And that same question to all of you before we move on. Dr. Theo Echampong, starting with you.
Yes, good morning. Pleasure to be here and happy to see my other co-panelists. I think we've made some progress since the beginning of the year in terms of, for example, the domestic debt exchange and other related matters. But by no means are we out of the woods yet. There's still quite a number of significant headwinds that the economy faces that we've got to address. And for me, particularly coming into the mid-year review today, I'm looking out for probably about 4 things that we should get some concrete answers to. The first one being, we know that we've got a $10.5 billion financing gap that we've got to close. This year alone, we're looking to raise about $2.5 billion to close that gap. So we need to hear what the government is doing in relation to that, and related to that matter, the issue of the external debt treatment. So where are we on those conversations and the negotiations, and what should we expect from our creditors? The second thing that I'm looking to hear something from is really around the structural or the economic reforms that are taking place. So where are we on revenue? Where are we on expenditure? Which, tax handles items have we made progress on, and particularly on expenditure, the cuts that were sort of promised, because under the IMF program, you got to do a two-thirds expenditure cut or rationalization by the end of the year. We're already halfway through the year, so we should actually see some numbers, right, on where we are related to that. And then also, thirdly, I think on the broader monetary sector, what is happening with the Bank of Ghana and those reforms, it would be good to hear some update on that. And lastly, the benchmarks that we've got to meet as part of the IMF program commitments. So November, the board would sit, but as of the end of June of this year, we should have met certain program benchmarks and criteria. One of them is the updated energy sector recovery plan. And again, I think it'll be good to get some details from the government on those matters. So those are the things that I think broadly I am looking out for from the government on this media budget.
Dr. Saad Idrisu, your take briefly on that point. Hello, Doc.
Yes, good morning, Ben, and good morning to my panelists as well. Well, I'm looking forward to certain changes to be made as well. I'm much particular on the e-levy, because if you look at the e-levy, it's more or less like a nuisance tax. Government is not getting the needed revenue that it projected it was going to get. Government projection before the passing of the e-levy was to be able to get about 4.5 billion annually. And so far, estimations that the government is only getting around 600 million annually. So government is not making that much. In place of that, I will expect government to bring back the road tolls. It's also a way of creating employment for those that were sacked. Remember, a lot of them were disabled people who are still jobless. Government could provide this sort of break for them by bringing them back into the system. And again, the introduction of the e-levy itself, displays a lot of the Momo vendors who were also out of jobs. So canceling the e-levy will bring back the Momo system into full perspective. And also, I would like government to kind of channel the needed resources. Wherever cuts they are going to make, they should be able to channel it into important projects at the moment, because we are almost less than 2 years down to an election year. So the possibility of a change of government is very high. And you don't want to hand over a lot of uncompleted projects to a new government that will take over. So government should, at this point in time, focus on important projects and forget about other projects that wouldn't inure so much to the benefit. And important projects like the Agenda 111, I believe is a priority which government should actually focus on. I've also heard other experts talking about the COVID levy that government should scrap it, considering the fact that the World Bank and other organizations are saying COVID is over. So if COVID is over, why will you still put in the COVID levy? So I totally agree with that. The government should be able to remove the COVID. That is all for now.
Maybe from the banking sector, Dr. Etiahene will have some more thoughts. Recently, we heard about the Bank of Ghana and what has been added to our debt stock. But what would be your take on that matter, and what your brief expectations, just brief expectations for now, because we'll have more time to delve into it. Dr. Etiahene.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think for me, I'm more concerned about the Bank of Ghana's losses and the impacts on its regulatory and supervisory factor on the banks. The reason why I'm more concerned is that looking at the published account that came Friday, basically The impaired losses of 48 billion and the revaluation losses of 7 billion has basically made Bank of Ghana given a negative capital. And I'm asking, how are we going to address this in the nearest possible time? Vis-a-vis, from the banking sector, I would also want to find out how has the operationalization of the financial stability, how has it far gone? Now that we've been told that the bank submitted their capital plan, I believe that the operationalization, especially for the indigenous banks, the local indigenous banks, we've heard that the multinational banks have started put in place their recapitalization. So for the time being, for me, I'm more concerned about, I would expect the finance minister to give us a detailed background of what has happened to Bank of Ghana. Because in the history of the country, this is the first time the central bank is being insolvent. What I mean by insolvent, if you look at the auditor's report, you could see that negative capital of 55 billion. What has happened? Didn't we say it? Why have we sat down for this to hit a central bank? Because when it happens like that, Ben, what it means is that your regulatory capacity has been incapacitated. What I mean is that you're supposed to look at the open market operation and providing emergency liquidity. But the Latin word say that, nemo dat non con habet. No one claims what he hasn't got. If you don't have it, how do you regulate it? And more importantly, for me, where I sit is that, when you do the debt restructuring and you reissue a new security, according to literature, you cannot give a zero risk rated bond to any institution because you yourself, you don't have. So how can you rate? These are the issues that I expect the finance minister to delve into it technically so that we understand why you issue a risk-free bond at spread over 15 years when the central bank and the government itself has defaulted. So these are the things that I want the finance minister to explain to the banking sector and the financial world so that we would appreciate the measures that he's putting in place to address it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiahine. Now, we have Gideon I.O., a tax partner with Deloitte Ghana, joining us in studio. Thank you for your time. So just we just had one of the panelists talk about his expectation on the e-levy. We know we didn't hit our target, but at least government is getting something, whether significant or not, there's something coming into the coffers of government. Would you say at this point, whether BOG, like we just heard, is recording losses, we're struggling, the economy is unstable, we're running an IMF program, would it be a prudent decision to scrap the e-levy or any tax for that matter?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. From a fiscal or tax policy view, we are looking at all the various new implementations that the government introduced earlier this year and late last year as part of this whole IMF restructuring, and to see what effect is fiscal policy helping the monetary policy and the central bank to be able to meet our growth objectives. Ghana wants to grow, but we know that the tax policy forms a part of it. So government needs revenue, but at the same time, they have to tread a balance of making sure that industry grows at the same time. So the e-levy, for example, we want to know how much has been accrued under the e-levy, the VAT increments that we've seen in the year, how much has it brought to the industry, and whether, as the AGI and other industry associations are saying, whether the increment in VAT is having a negative effect on growth. If we see this and based on the information coming out, then it means that government really has to do something about it so that make sure that things like the e-levy, VAT increment or the excise tax increment that came on, whether they have to go down or whether it is left at the same point.
But interestingly, though, on the back of what Bernice asked you, you mentioned the e-levy.
Yeah.
Dr. Saad Idrisu made mention of how much we've been getting, about 600 million.
Yeah.
If your expectations were upwards north of, in fact, it was around 6 billion initially, brought down to around 4.5 billion, and now you're raking in 600 million. Is that not clear enough on the back of what Bernice asked you.
I agree to that point. But as I said, this is the case where government revenue or the need to bring in government revenue has to be balanced with growth of the economy. So if government looks at it and say, well, we think we can get so much and it's not happening, I think that's something they could look at. So it's not a direct, straightforward answer, but I'll look for more information coming from this budget review. What have they accrued so far? And then if there's any more data or scientific evidence to back it and whether they should review it. So we should look at the issue of whether there should be a review or not, but also say that any review should be balanced with the need for government to rake in revenue. For me, I'm looking at more of industry, the manufacturing sector, agro-processing, the 1D, 1F. What effects are they having on the economy? Is the revenue expected from there coming? If there should be any reviews in tax rates going down, I think it should be very targeted at the productive sectors of our economy.
Right. We've also been joined by former Finance Minister Seth Terkper via Zoom. Good morning to you, Mr. Terkper. Thank you so much for joining the program. We've had the initial thoughts of our analysts, but there's just something peculiar, especially with this government when it comes to presentation of budgets, and it has to do with the shifting of timelines almost every time you're supposed to have a budget reading or a mid-year budget review. What does that communicate to you?
Very much, and good morning to your listeners and to fellow panelists. Well, I think it's a confidence issue, preparedness. The short answer to that, because you have announced the date, but then the government is under the Public Financial Management Act. Today is the last day in the act when the media review, should be presented. So one can say that they have met the deadline, but the expectation is that normally it's like the budget should be presented and appropriation act, the budget itself and the appropriation act should be passed, at the end, of the year, by the end of the year. But in that case, under the Public Financial Management Act, there are timelines when things should be done. Not in the case of the media review, specific. So the media review simply says, the Public Financial Management Act simply says that it must be done by July, 31st, which is today. So we'll say that they are within, the deadline. But if I may say by way of introduction, that one, this what is happening now is a legal requirement. It used to be optional. The Constitution only spelled that if you needed a supplementary budget, then you should go to budget and you should go to Parliament for approval, because it's only, Parliament. And so any notion that we are not going to, ask for a supplementary budget is neither here nor there. That has to be looked at in the fiscal context. This is not, an introduction in the Public Financial Management Act that replaced the Financial Administration Act. A supplementary budget was created in both. But then in line with best financial practices now, and even in the US, mid-year reviews have become a common phenomenon, and that's why it was put in, so that there's a requirement for us not to wait for a whole year before a review is done. And if you read, section 27, it gives you all the requirements that must be met by the minister. So the minister is not going to select what he has to present. They are spelled out, it includes a review of the macroeconomy. It includes, a view of where the estimates that were presented, whether it will be met. And it also indicates its impact even on the medium term, and that medium term now is also the medium term. The medium term for the budget, which is 3 years, is also the framework for the IMF program. And so this budget is very important in the context. The media review and the budget that is to come are very important in the context, of the IMF program.
And I appreciate that you bring the context in because, like you said, we are running an IMF program. We have just had the Bank of Ghana tell us about its losses recorded. You have been at this point before. When I say at this point, I mean having to run an IMF program and create a budget as well. Over the years, we've heard from the finance minister there was the Juma budget, there was the Nkosua and Nkabom budget. If there was any thematic point that this budget should focus on, what should it be?
From my perspective, Ghana is not at a point where we are making a correction. Most of IMF programs have been about making corrections. Something hits the economy, like COVID, drought, or others. And because we lack the resources, then we go, to the IMF, supported by the World Bank, African Development Bank, development partners, and then we do a correction. That is what the past 16 or 17 programs are about. In those programs, you have structural elements. But I would say that where we are now, Ghana is in a structural correction. I'm afraid when you talk about, huge expenditures, which is the issue, one of the big issues, whether you're talking about a Jumapa or whatever, they're neither here nor there. We are locked out. We cannot borrow for those things because all our revenue is virtually paying only compensation and interest. We defaulted. That's the fact we must accept. And you know what is happening in Bank of Ghana? Mr. Chuahine mentioned one aspect. But I'll come from the fiscal or public financial management perspective. Remember, the Bank of Ghana, and Theo has mentioned this, several times. The Bank of Ghana has been supporting financing government beyond the 5% in the Act, and therefore far beyond the zero financing that we attained in 2016 to the tune of 44 billion. If your deficit is 37 billion and your bank is supporting you 40 billion, it showed our lack of access, and therefore a reliance on the central bank. Now, what it means is that we depleted the Bank of Ghana's own reserves. That's where the bankruptcy issue comes in. It is a fiscal that depleted it. We've been mentioning this for a very long time. And here you are again, the same Bank of Ghana, in addition to the points, the balance sheet. The balance sheet was a source. The same Bank of Ghana, we are being told, is writing off 37 billion of money lent to government in order that we can meet the DDE requirements.
Mr. Tepe, just kindly round it up for me so that I can get the thoughts of the others as well.
I was just rounding up. So I'm saying that the interrelationship between the Bank of Ghana and Ministry of Finance is what needs to be examined. And this is where we need to make a distinction between accountability and independence. Elsewhere, the BOG, our central bank, goes, doesn't go to parliament, except for foreign exchange under the constitution. Elsewhere, the governor, the governors or the chairman, like the Fed, they do go. We are in a structural mode. And I think that's what we have to consider. How are we going to, let me just say how are we going to ensure that we balance the budget? 2, how are we going to make sure that we return to borrowing and stop relying on only treasury bills? It's not sustainable. And that brings in meeting the domestic, debtors. And how are we going to meet the external, creditors, the external creditors, so that we can bring things back on course? I don't think this is a budget that should be talking about big projects. There's just no funding, for those big projects as we speak, except for those that development partners may already be financing. Particularly, that's why the World Bank has become very prominent. The World Bank, African Development Bank, and then whatever the IMF will give us as a result of the program.
Dr. Chuahine, in addition to the Bank of Ghana announcing the losses it made, it also told us that steps it was taking to recover from those losses. And one of them is refraining from monetary financing of the government of Ghana's budget. An MOU was signed in April this year. Do you think that decision is enough? I know there are a couple of others, but this particular decision for zero financing of government's budget, Is it enough to help us, recover from the BOG's losses? Dr.
Thank you
Etiahene.
very much.
Right.
I think, as people have been saying, hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Yeah, as we've been saying all along, I think it's good we have these laws all over the place. But I think the application and enforcement has been the problem. I listened to Mr. Secretary talking about the Financial Management Act and all those things. These things are there, and people are deliberately breaching it. And they breach it and get away with it. I think a time have come for us as a nation. Do we need IMF to come and say that zero financing? I mean, we need as a country, I urge and I plead with those in authority that we need to insert some of these things in the constitution, even debt limits, debt caps, so that you don't just get up and borrow and leave us in such a state. We are in such a state because we think we can come and tell Ghanaians that we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this. But the question is that, how do we finance this? As we are speaking now, how are we going to finance even the Bank of Ghana that is insolvent? And then in addition to the banking sector, which is not functioning.
We seem to have a challenge with Doc's line. The network has gone bad. But I'd like to take your thoughts as well, Dr. Theo Champong, while we wait for Dr. Etiahene's line to... Hello, Doc, are you back? Dr. Etiahene, are you back? Well, the line is bad. We need to wait for him to reconnect. So, Dr. Theo Champong, same question to you. But this time round, the angle is this zero financing by the Bank of Ghana towards the government of Ghana's budget. What is the impact going to be like? What should we brace ourselves for?
The impact is very simple. And I think the important thing, especially in this media budget, like others have alluded to, is to see whether or not the government has actually made any commitment on the zero financing. What I mean by that is, since the MOU was signed, we seen the central bank not advancing any overdraft and related, facilities to the central government or the treasury. That I think is really important, because we know that these MOUs tend to be signed anyway. But like Dr. Toyin was saying, sometimes we sign it and then we put it aside and do something else. The importance is quite clear that this is one of the anchors that would drive us towards fiscal sustainability. In fact, when you read the IMF document that was produced a couple of months ago, they talk about trying to safeguard the independence of the central bank and in a way allowing them to be what they call mitigate quote unquote fiscal dominance. What they're trying to say is that the central bank had been used as a conduit for financing the treasury-related expenditures, especially when Ghana did not have access to borrowing from the international capital markets and related things. So the MOU is important, but for me, the most important thing beside the MOU, like I indicated, is to see what commitment has actually been made since that time. And then number two, as we go towards the latter part of the year, there's actually meant to be an amendment to the Bank of Ghana Act, the Act 612, which is meant to provide very clear instances or definitions of when and under which emergency situations the central bank would be able to loan money or provide these overdrafts to the government. Those, I think, are the important things. And in the media budget, it will be good to get very clear, benchmarks on what the government has done related to this and what they're going to do to ensure that these amendments are actually passed in a way that will safeguard the independence of the central bank and, in a sense, mitigate the fiscal dominance that we've been talking about here.
We have Dr. Chiahene back now. Doc, sorry we lost you. If you could just kindly wrap up on what you were saying with regards to the zero financing decision and what it's likely going to do for the budget.
Thank you very much. I think, like Dr. Tio has said, we need to find out that how far have we gone with the zero financing? Has there been any tentative agreement or written to say? And again, are we going to to amend the Bank of Ghana law to make sure that these things are actually enshrined in the law or whatever enacted in the law, so that we will restrict this monetary finance of the fiscal finance? Because we find ourselves, the financing has dominated the monetary, and so therefore the monetary is financing the financing deficit of the government. And we must make sure that these things are really, really followed religiously, so that we don't find ourselves. And I want to see what measures, like Dr. Tio said, what things is the finance minister going to tell us that these things are going to go to Parliament for it to be amended to ensure that what the IMF has signed with us, we are following it religiously. Other than that, especially getting to the election year, it's going to be another talk show. It has happened to us before. Anytime we go into election year, people spend and spend and spend as if the world is coming to an end.
Right. And
they will leave the next government in a serious problem. So I would urge that today, those who are supposed to ask these questions in Parliament must ask him and find an answer to it, that these things are going to be amended. Here is the draft. The laws are going to come for the legislature to ensure that we don't fall a victim to this again in the history of the country.
Benjamin will be coming in shortly, Doc, but then you highlight a cycle and an ending, process that we go through every time. So the IMF comes in, we're stable for a while, we go back into the mess, and there are people like you we engage every day who prefer such brilliant solutions. What have you found to be the struggle with governments over the years in really going according to the solutions or what the books say? Because clearly we don't lack the knowledge, right? We do have it right here. So why are we denying ourselves the beautiful economy, the stable economies that we all know how to get to?
First, I will talk about meritocracy. In our system, meritocracy doesn't work. You must belong to a certain party before you are called upon to advise. I believe, as a nation, we should have a national agenda. Because you see, what is happening is that the politicians will promise heaven and earth without even looking at the funding of it. And when they come to take over, then they have a problem. Either we go to external to borrow, or we borrow domestically to crowd out the private sector, or we overburden ourselves with interest payment and debt. I believe that, I will always want to say this, we must get to the Constitution and put a debt limit cap that you cannot do more than 50% of the GDP as against nearly 100% of the GDP we are facing. Until we get it Constitution, we get it put in the Constitution and let it be seen like, sorry to say, like a Bible for the country. I don't think the politicians will do that. They will talk, they promise everything.
This is Benjamin. I just have to interject briefly. Even the Americans have a debt ceiling that they've had to time and again push up. In recent times, the Joe Biden administration had to basically plead with the Republicans for that. We have our own parliamentary processes when it comes to our own caps, and even that we've not applied. We find ways of circumventing them. So is that really the solution?
Well, the Americans will use the Constitution and go to Republicans to seek help. For us, your party, if you are in the numbers, if you have 150 or 170 people, you say, yeah, and it's approved. But if it's inserted in the Constitution, then you need to go and amend the Constitution before you can do the yeah. Unfortunately, we must be very serious about this thing that has happened to Ghana. And we must have a critical learning out of it. We must do a reflective learning and critical learning so that we don't go and find ourselves into it, because we promise everything over the earth. I've never seen politicians promising things that they have not even quantized it. And at least the good book tells me in Luke 14:28, Who will build up a tower without sitting down to know the cost before starting? If you are not able to complete, the people will laugh at you. Now we are a laughing stock. We are a laughing stock. You have a central bank which is insolvent. You have a banking sector which is non-existent. And then you have the private sector which will depend on the banking to finance who cannot finance. And all that we find, we are being saddled with taxes and over-bloated government expenditure. Government expenditure. Why can't we put something there so that
here, please?
My children will come to know that these things are inserted the consumer? You can American go to the Republicans. Where do we go? We go with numbers, and then we say yeah, and it's approved.
Let me bring in Mr. Tekwe. I heard you, but for the sake of time, we have to really manage the time. So when I come next to you, I'll give you a slice on this before we move on. Thank you. Dr. Saad Idrisu, so quickly on this point, I just want us to take a quick look because the numbers don't lie and the numbers determine where our economy is going. If just to go back to that Bank of Ghana and the losses it incurred in 2022, we're looking at a whopping 60.86 billion Ghana cedis. Look at the breakdown in terms of what has been lost to the DDEP, over 40 billion Ghana cedis. Then we look at the cedi's depreciation, of course, that affects our tax, our debt components, 5.27 billion. Then 6.12 billion lost to impairment of loans and advances. If you look at the central bank itself, for the first time in a long while, incurring such losses, what pressure does that put on our economy? And how should our mid-year budget review address these circumstances? Because it's added a component of about 20% to our debt stock.
Well, thank you. I think the most basic point to make here is that the central bank is supposed to be autonomous. That is what is said based on the rules and all that. But with the kind of economy we operate, there's no way that the central bank will be autonomous, in the sense that the intermarriage between the central bank and the executive will always play a role. But the main point for the central bank governor to always put behind is the fact that there are certain limits you need not cross to the point of putting the central bank in this form of insolvency. And again, if you look at the whole report, I mean, I read the forward that was issued by the central bank governor and Addison himself. I mean, aside just blaming part of the debt onto the DDEP, if you go detail into the report, you could realize that the central bank itself hasn't been prudent in its management of their expenditure.
Are you saying the central bank has been reckless?
The central bank has been reckless. Excuse me to say, it's been purely reckless. Purely reckless. If you know that you have made reckless advances to government, resulting in a haircut, already you know you are making losses. So at that point in time, let's just say the central bank was a private entity. Will the governors manage it the way they will have managed their own private businesses? Because a business that is making losses should be cutting back on expenditure, not rather increasing expenditure at this point in time. So whatever it is, even if the DDEP had a factor to play in this law, the central bank mismanagement itself or their own recklessness also contributed to it. And I'm going to give you some examples of their expenditure. If you go to the report itself, take an example of banking supervision expenditure. How can 2022 banking supervision expenditure increase 362%? Then let's be serious. Will you run your own organization like that? In 2021, you were spending 77.4 million cedis for banking supervision expenditure. In 2022, you increased it to 357.9 million. That is 362% increment. Let's be realistic. Which organization would run like that the whole world?
So in other words, the central bank has always been on the precipice of some sort of disaster. This was just waiting to happen. But if you listen to
they themselves are a contributory factor to this own mess. Aside the DDEP being a contributory factor, the central bank itself is a contributory factor. Look at foreign and domestic travel. If you know the economy is in a crisis, why would the central bank spend over 246% increment on domestic and foreign travels. Is it necessary? Let's be realistic. That is why I said, even though the central bank is a public institution, at least people in charge of it must still run it with some decorum.
All right. Before I come into the studio, just because of some of the points you've made. So what do we do then? The shape, the manner the central bank operates in. Is it high time we looked at it? And again, the central bank's governor, Dr. Ernest Addison, makes mention of the fact that all these things happening do not point to or do not imply a loss of policy effectiveness. That doesn't mean they have lost their way when it comes to policy effectiveness and efficiency. But then there's also talk about the fact that they are now going to have to rely on government for recapitalization. What could that mean by way of the budget, the mid-year budget review?
Even aside that they are relying on government, the commercial banks, the funded, the Ghana Financial Stability Fund that was supposed to be set up, the government have not even been able to deliver with that. So how can the government even support the central bank at this point in time?
Good question.
That is the basic question we should ask. The $1.5 billion financial stability fund was supposed to be established by the end of June or July. We are almost heading into August. It hasn't even been set up yet. So where will government even get funds to come in to support the central bank at this point in time? So I think we have to just move away from the rhetoric and face the reality that we are in a serious crisis. And duty bearers at this point in time must go back and reflect on some of these things.
Right.
How will we be able to control our own expenditures? I think it will be one way of solving some of these scenarios. Because you cannot be spending like a king whilst you're depending on grants and loans. I don't think it's appropriate in any jurisdiction.
Doc, thank you. Let me come into the studio now. Gideon is still here, and you're a tax man through and through. I just want you to put it bluntly. Sometimes people like to massage the facts. Where we are with all our tax burden as a people, I mean, there are taxes, hefty taxes on sanitary products, for example. Our women, they are called luxuries, when in fact, these are things that women don't opt to do. They have no choice in them. Are we overburdened? Considering some of the taxes that our guests have spoken of, the e-levy, what is the COVID-19 levy even doing there? Is the ordinary Ghanaian, including business, already overtaxed? And are you seeing that trend where this is beginning to affect the revenue that government has? Because if you tax people to the ground, you are going to end up with revenue shortfalls or tax shortfalls.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, so there's a general perception in the economy. So Deloitte, in anticipation of this media budget, we carried out a survey where we had around 300 entities participating. And some of the issues that came to them at the top of their mind. What are your issues worrying you about the economy? Or inflation was there, devaluation of the cedi was there, tax rates was there. In fact, they were worried that there might be further tax increments within
this window.
Yeah, so there is that perception that businesses are overburdened with a lot of taxes. What can we do about it? As we all know, government is looking for revenue. We don't have access to the international financial market now. So we now have to fall on ourselves. And so looking at the revenue side, another side is also make sure that the expenditure side, we also look at, we have to cut down at it. So it shouldn't just be about the revenue increment, etc. But then what other expenditure could be cut to make sure that government does not run at a deficit or at a zero financing going to Bank of Ghana. So it's a general perception that yes, that's true. Most of our participants in that survey echo the same sentiments. What can we do about it? And that's what we are trying to say, that some of these solutions should be targeted. The issue about the sanitary part has also come up. Can we also look at local manufacturers? What are they doing? What other incentives can government give to local manufacturers to support them to be able to meet this gap and ensure that a lot of these sanitary parts are coming from outside? Even without the taxes, the devaluation of the cedi is already making them expensive.
Right.
Even if you take the taxes there, I think somebody has done analysis, up to around 30% of the increment is coming from devaluation of the cedi. So it's not just about taxes, but to making sure that we get local alternatives to ensure that it's not just paying outside or using hard-earned cities to get that, but then local manufacturers will also get that benefit and to help price increments or avoid the inflation issues you're facing. The other point too is that with looking at that, they are all interlinked. So inflation, devaluation of the CD, etc. But then looking at the government revenue too, if it doesn't go up and it stays at the current levels, government will have to find a way to increase it. But then if local industry is boosted and it grows, there wouldn't be that need or urgency to go back to the international market quickly. So it's, as I say, it's not a direct answer for a tax consultant, but it's something that a lot of thought has to go into.
And Benjamin, one word our panelists have used today cuts across, it's expenditure. And it seems
I was just about to go into
that. It's a big deal, because I remember even at the time we started having conversations about going to the IMF, it was one thing analysts said, we need to see tangibles, we need to see government make real commitment in that sector. I just want to ask you first, have you seen anything like that since we started this entire conversation about going to the IMF? And if you haven't seen, what would be that 1, 2, 3 things that would be a clear indication that, okay, government is committed to reducing expenditure?
Okay, I would like to take your question a bit further. There's another type of expenditure we are all not focusing on. Of course, there's the usual government running machinery expenditure, but then there are other items which ends up falling on government. We all know there's a big hanging debt in terms of independent power producers. There's a big debt hanging on them, and they want government to pay. If we, the consumers, businesses are not paying, it will have to fall on government, and that becomes an expenditure of government. We are aware of some of these financial costs in terms of restructuring of the financial sector. It fell on government. That's also another government expenditure. And these are quite significant. So we are, from this media budget review, I would expect to see something said about how government is going to handle the independent power producers in terms of the cost of energy that we are paying for. And what other efficiencies...
But I thought that was clear. There's no way forward. I mean, we don't have the money. How much did we even get? How much are we getting from the IMF this year? 900 million. We got 600 million. We're getting another 300 million. We're talking billions of dollars that we owe them.
Yeah, so somebody...
We don't have a clear plan.
2 billion.
Somebody has to pay. And so if government doesn't have that amount of money, then we, the consumers, businesses are going to pay. And let's not forget that if the cost of energy goes up, it's going to affect industry as well. Cost of inflation also continues to rise. And we know government is battling, handling inflation now. So if that section or that side of our economy is not handled very well, the inflation rates that we are seeing will continue to increase.
A quick one to you before we get to the other guests. On that same point of expenditure, you would notice that the Buffer Food stock company, for example, recently was struggling to make some payments on the back of releases from the Finance Ministry to the Ministry of Education. But the point to be made is that government is not backing down on its flagship programs. Free SHS, One Village, One Dam, and all of that. A lot of them have proven ineffective and inefficient, yet we are following through on them, saying that we are not backing down at a cost. From that end, what do we do? What would you like to see? Do we shave off on some of them? What is the practical way that the taxman would suggest we cut down on expenditure?
Okay, so this is a very difficult one, and I know the Finance Ministry is also managing or trying to handle this. From where I sit, or as a tax consultant, as I said, the economy is very much linked now, the devaluation of the CD, inflation, etc. Government really has to look at some of these flagship programs and understand something of that sort is ongoing to see to what effect can government look at cutting down the expenditure on this area. But let's not forget that in the economy that we have, government is one of the significant players. We still want to have economic growth in the country. So if government pulls back too much, it's going to affect a whole lot of things. So government really has to play a careful balance to really look at which areas does it think that it can pull back from and which areas that when it continues to go, it doesn't affect our economic growth. So pull back, but then we also have to make sure that it doesn't affect economic growth.
You introduced a very important concept of balance. So let me get to former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. As we have said, government has projects to complete, payments to make that have been highlighted, debts and all that. But we still need to progress. We still need to move forward. How does government balance itself at this point and I remember asking that question earlier, but I just want more specifics now. What clearly should be the focus of this budget, and what should we, like Mr. Ayi Owu suggested, what should government put a stop to for now while we wait to make significant progress and recovery?
Well, thank you very much. The point is that we are at a point where, unlike previous governments, the government is not even able to borrow, apart from T-bills. It's not even able to borrow from its domestic, markets. So if government is not going to tackle expenditure, and that is why you have not seen much progress on that front, and that is why arrears has become a major issue. We've not spoken about arrears. In fact, okay, somebody just mentioned, one of you mentioned bulk, storage and others. We are sitting, or as of 2021, we were sitting on a 77 billion Ghana cedi pipeline of contracts that were awarded, out of which 24 billion or so was paid, or suppose that's what the government said. By 2022, when we reviewed the report, this had gone down significantly by, again, 37 billion. When you go to the IMF, what has happened is that governments did not pay that amount. That amount, 37, has been added to the debt program. Is there in the review, in the debt sustainability analysis. So sometimes some of us seems to be talking numbers, but you have to track these things to know what is going on. So the arrears have just been packed onto debt as part of the DDE that we are talking about. It's not being paid. And inclusive in that arrears are the IPP debt and the other bailout costs. But when we talk about that, I think that's the point I wanted to make. In conjunction with what Mr. Chuahine was saying, we have done some of these things before. I think we should also begin to talk about where we have had, some successes. For example, ESLA was supposed to pay the entire IPP debt as of 2016, in 2015. That was the essence of ESLA. It was supposed to pay a substantial amount, about 2/3 or so, of road contract arrears, right? So how can we be talking about, and we did the VRE payments of, VRE is our local IPP producing, gas. Remember, we refinanced and paid part of the loan they took from banks. We didn't give the money to VRA, we gave the money directly to the banks. This program was stopped. So we should also have a bit of hindsight. What happened, to the ESLA revenue? To your point, what we need to do is simple. We have to cut expenditure. Otherwise, in fact, the food producers themselves are not even producing for the free SHS and the rest. We have to, every program we have had has had an expenditure, serious expenditure component. Let me give you an example. We had to stop, a substantial number of the e-schools. It wasn't completely free SHS, it was partial. We had to stop in 2016.
Mr. Tucker, we are running out of time, unfortunately. So I would like for you to give me specifics that you want government to hold on to, specific projects.
Well, cut expenditure is always been done. 2, move away from increasing tax only and look at tax administration, look at compliance. Remember, GRA was created, VAT and income IRS were merged to strengthen. We did ICOMs. It was time to do despite the digital era, it was time to digitalize the domestic tax administration. It's stalled. It's in the IMF program. We are being asked to do it. Next, go back to gift miss. It's in the IMF program as some of the things that we are supposed to do. We initiated all of these things already. Gift miss and control expenditure, right? And stop awarding contracts when you do not have the money. And then it is only then that you will you will put some stop to the borrowing, which is the problem of the debt. Next, restore, no matter how, even if it's a penny, start putting money back into the sinking fund. We cannot be borrowing and
Right.
not be repaying.
Right.
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 So these are all the practical steps which I would think that we should be moving back. And all of these are back in the IMF program. Our own initiatives are now back as though it is a fund that is forcing us, to go and do, this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tekwe.
Homegrown policy.
And to you, Dr. Tiahine, in wrapping up, we just had Dr. Saad talk about or describe the expenditure increase of the Bank of Ghana with regards to, Benjamin, remind me again, what was it on? Was it surveillance, Dr. Saad, where he mentioned over 300%? He described it as reckless. I'd just like to take your thoughts on this one that is brewing in CBG. And the MP for Bogatanga's Central, a deputy ranking member of Parliament Select Committee on Finances, recently complained about the decision to make a deputy managing director of operations at CBG. That position has been given to a Kenyan, and he alleges that he's been paying expatriate salary. His argument is that there are qualified people in Ghana who can do that job. So why make such a decision which will be a financial burden on the CBG? And your quick thoughts on that in wrapping up.
Well, if there are competent people in Ghana, if we allow men to crash.
Sorry, Doc, your line is bad again. Dr. Tiahine, if you can hear me, we seem to have a challenge with Doc's line. So we're running out of time, so we'll try and get the last words of Dr. Theo Champong and Dr. Saad as well. So hopefully at the end we can get Dr. Tiahine again. So Doc, this is where we are. People clearly, and Dr. Tiahine quoted a scripture and said, we have become a laughing stock. How do we redeem ourselves? And we just had some practical steps being preferred by former Finance Minister Seth Tekwe. But how long will it take us to get onto a stable recovery path?
It's going to take a while. I think at the minimum you're looking at 3 years, if not more, just to have some modicum of stability. But I think the important point that we're all making across the table here is we need some honesty from the managers of the economy in terms of what got us to where we are at the moment. Because if you look or you assess on the issue of policy effectiveness or efficiency, we score almost zero, whether it is monetary or whether it is fiscal. On monetary, you can look at the Bank of Ghana. Saad has talked about them, but even the idea of inflation targeting and all of that, it's way outside of the central bank's own targets. So to come and make the argument that the policy seems to be working is neither here nor there. So I think for far too long we focused a lot of our attention on the government side. I mean, the Treasury, Bank of Ministry of Finance, but we need to place additional emphasis on the central bank. And that report that has come out is very, very telling because, the devil is in the details. Saad gave some details. If you look at their motor vehicle and maintenance expenses, how does that expense move up from 61 million in 2021 to 132 million just in the space of a year? It makes no sense, right? You've got to put more emphasis there as we address the fiscal side of the equation.
All right, Doc, sorry to cut you, Doc. We've just got a minute.
I'll just wrap budget or an Apateshi budget and try to live a champagne lifestyle. It just wouldn't wash. So you've got to live within your means.
Right. Dr. Tiahine, briefly, in about a minute, if you can, just your comments on what's brewing at CBG.
Well, I don't know much about the story, but if there are a lot of competent people in Ghana and we go for expatriate, then I find it quite disturbing.
But is it wrong? Is it wrong for us to go for an expatriate? Is there anything wrong with it?
You see, if their skills is specialized, but you see, they are in retail banking, and there are a lot of good retail bankers in Ghana. I don't think it's called for a specialized area. It's not a specialized area that will require expertise, because history. Once upon a time, Standard and Barclays used to bring a lot of expertise to their sector. But I think during Dr. Kwesi time, it was made that you cannot bring 2 or 3. And
Okay.
they've been able to bring Ghanaians to the level that they're able to manage. I mean, after all, today, Standard is being managed by a Ghanaian. I mean, it's not a fantastic story. It means there are Ghanaians here.
Right.
Standard is being managed by a Ghanaian, a lady. So for me, I don't want to comment too much, but I don't know the story.
All right, Doc. I'm so sorry, Dr. Saad Idrisu. We've just run out of time. I would have liked to take your concluding thoughts. Hopefully, we'll be able to reach out to all of you when the budget is read for your reactions, because you've told us your expectations. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. But Benjamin, that will be our show for today. Aisha Ibrahim takes over. Hopefully, the minister will be coming to Parliament soon. We won't hear any more postponements. But that'll be it from Benjamin and I on the AM show. Up next is News Desk with Aisha Ibrahim.